All right. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining. I think we'll go ahead and get started on our presentation tonight on selecting native plants. I wanted to start with some introductions first. My name is Andrea Chow, and I'm the Sustainability Analyst with the City of San Mateo.
And I'm Michelle Boutze, and I'm one of the librarians at the San Mateo Public Library.
In this presentation, and we'll go ahead and, sorry, I'll let you introduce yourself too, Juanita, and you'll get more of our introduction later as well.
And I'm Juanita Salisbury, your instructor for this evening.
Great. And this presentation is brought to you in partnership with the Bay Area Water Supply and Conservation Agency. I wanted to start with a little bit of background about BOSCA. BOSCA represents 26 agencies that include cities, water districts, and a water company, and a university that purchase water wholesale from the San Francisco Regional Water System. And BOSCA member agencies provide water to 1.8 million people and over 40,000 businesses and community organizations in Alameda, Santa Clara, and San Mateo counties. The goal of today's program is really to address outdoor water use. Outdoor water use represents the single largest untapped opportunity for water conservation in the BOSCA service area, and outdoor water use reduction through the use of low water plants and innovative techniques can help conserve water and ensure that future water supply needs of our communities are met. So you can actually save money while conserving water. So we wanted to highlight some of the ways you can do that. BOSCA offers rebate programs in partnership with participating agencies. There are programs such as a turf replacement program through Lawn Be Gone that offers $1 or up to $4 per square foot of lawn, depending on your participating agency. And they also offer a rain barrel rebate. Other rebates include their Smart Controller Rebate and Installation Program and a Rain Garden Rebate Program. And all of this information can be found at bayareaconservation.org. If you are a City of San Mateo resident, your water provider is Cal Water. So I wanted to provide specific guidance for City of San Mateo residents because for Cal Water rebates, you'll need to access those through Cal Water. Cal Water currently has a free water conservation kit that includes a garden hose nozzle with a shutoff valve, high efficiency shower heads, faucet aerators, and more. And they also offer rebate programs similar to what you can access through BOSCA. So they have rebates for hot water efficient toilets, clothes washers. They also have a smart irrigation controllers rebate. And in 2021, Cal Water relaunched their turf replacement program. So customers can receive $3 per square foot of lawn transformed and an extra 50 cents per square foot if the irrigation is also converted to drip. All of this information can be found at www.calwater.com/conservation. And if you are a San Mateo resident, you are still eligible for that rain barrel rebate, and you should go through BOSCA for that program. BOSCA continues to provide more information, more programs for learning about gardening, including gardening with succulents, water-wise edible gardening, and more tips to convert your lawn to water-efficient landscape. And this information is found at bayareaconservation.org. And then there's this great resource at bayareagardening.org, this water-wise gardening website. So this resource has a bunch of different galleries of gardens with plants identified. There's a plant selection tool and a watering calculator. So all of these resources might be helpful to you if you're choosing to transform any part of your landscape into something that maybe is more water efficient. And now I'm going to hand it over to Michelle to talk a little bit about the library's programs.
Thanks, Andrea. So I wanted to mention a few things that are new to San Mateo Public Library this month. On the topic that we're talking about tonight, we have some Waterwise gardening resources for you. This is a reading list that's on the library's website. And you can look at those books. Some of them are online, some of them are physical books. You can put holds on them and come and pick them up when they're ready. So check those out if you'd like to. Also during the month of May, we have a free giveaway on the second floor of the main library, and we're giving away seed packets of wildflower seeds, along with instructions of how to plant wildflower seeds, and a card that shows you what bees are local to our area. So we'd love to have you come by and pick up some of those. And finally, we're offering now California State Parks passes, day use passes that you can check out just like books and put on hold just like books. You'll find those in our catalog online. And it gets you day use of the state parks as well as free parking. And I think it's not all of the state parks, but it's the majority of them. So here's how you can participate in today's program. We will love to have your questions, and we're going to take questions after Juanita's presentation is through. So you can do that in two ways. You can raise your hand. There's a little raise hand button at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and you can do it that way, or you can click on the Q&A button also at the bottom of your Zoom screen and type in your question. So we will wait until the end of the program for that. This webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be made available, and the PowerPoint will also be made available. So don't feel as if you have to take notes during. I believe that is all we have to go over. So thank you for joining us tonight, and I will introduce tonight's speaker. Juanita Salisbury has a PhD in biopsychology from the University of Florida, as well as a Bachelor of Science in Landscape Architecture from West Virginia University. In 2009, she established Juanita Salisbury Landscape Architecture after working for commercial and residential design firms. She's recently turned her focus to California native plant pollinator habitats, and in 2016 established the Primrose Way Pollinator Garden, the first of 5 pollinator habitat gardens in Palo Alto. The gardens combine her educational background, the biology and behavior of food intake, with design expression born from landscape architecture. Her focus is to research and educate about these habitats, as well as exploring opportunities to install more of them. So Juanita, thank you for joining us tonight and being our instructor and taking our questions. And we'll turn it over to you.
Yes, thanks, Michelle. All right, let me share my screen here. And slideshow from the beginning. Here we are. Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us this evening. As Michelle mentioned, I'm Juanita Salisbury. I'm a California registered landscape architect, and I have a pretty heavy-duty science background. So I try to research all of my design decisions going forward in terms of generating the best practices for design and for selecting native plants that will really have the best impact, both for the environment as well as how we can best conserve moisture. So tonight I'm going to be talking about sort of these broad concepts, because not every single little specific thing will apply to everybody. It's better to sort of understand the more broad concept to take home and then find those places where that concept works best for you, and let those concepts guide you. You can follow the Primrose Way Pollinator Garden on both Facebook and Instagram. I post there nearly every day. And I do have a YouTube channel, Primrose Way. So lots of interesting macro photos and upcoming events and all kinds of things are posted on those sites. I do take care of 5 pollinator gardens here in Palo Alto that I designed and installed. This is a map of Palo Alto, and this is Embarcadero Road. So there's the Island Drive Garden, which is between Hamilton and Edgewood. It's this Newell Road coming through. The Arcadia Place Pollinator Garden, Hopkins Avenue Pollinator Garden, Gwynda Street Pollinator Garden, and then the Primrose Way Pollinator Garden. And then we're connecting these 2 gardens on Embarcadero Road via our Pollinator Corridor project, which is ongoing. So tonight I'm going to talk about how form follows function. This is a basic design concept and really should be used to guide your decisions on what plants to select and where to put things. We're going to talk about getting rid of your lawn, that thirsty carpet that takes up so much water. We'll talk about lawn alternatives. And we're also going to, of course, talk about trees and native plants, because this is about selecting those native plants. And then a little bit about the maintenance of those plants that we install. And I try to liven up the slides with lots of photos that I take of the various insects. I do a lot of monitoring of species that I see. That's one of the ways that I know what I'm doing is actually working. And I've been doing that basically every single week since 2016. So I have lots of photos. So first of all, do you need a lawn? Remember, form follows function. How are you going to use the area? Consider where you walk, where you sit, where things are going to be planted, where you play, the uses, the functions, and figuring out where those functions happen. That generates a form for you to use. And so thinking about function, we can leverage our function-based decision-making to optimize water use. And as Michelle and Andrea mentioned, the outdoor irrigation accounts for most of a home's water use. Lawns can use up to 50% of outdoor water use. So consider the function when you're having a lawn, whether you want one or not. What are lawns used for? Also, I ran across a study, mowing intensively increases weed and lawn pests. So, you know, something to consider in terms of lawns. And in this slide, notice where the people are congregating. Everybody's on the patio, hanging out around the fire pits. So, you know, what are the functions of these spaces? So this looks a little complicated, but don't get scared. In this first box here, I took from the Codes and Standard Research Report, California's Residential Indoor Water Use Report from the second edition of 2015. And this shows kind of an average 3-bedroom home, how much water is being used, generated by shower head use, lavatory faucets, kitchen faucets, toilets, clothes washer, and those sorts of things. And for an average 3-bedroom house, they're saying about 46,000 gallons of water for indoor use alone. So I thought, all right, let's see how the numbers stack up in real life. And so one of the things I do as a landscape architect is I design irrigation systems. And I also calculate how much each valve is going to use during the year. And this is the table that I created showing what the water budget was for these 9 valves that this particular client of mine got. And the 2 areas that are in boxes, that's the lawn in terms of like the estimated total water usage. So in a couple of lawn areas, it's a lot. And the percent of area, so not very big. So anyhow, the water use outside the irrigation is 63,000 gallons of water per year. While if this is an average home, it's using 46,000 gallons a year. So more outside than inside. And the lawn is using up a lot of that water on the outside, 28,000 some gallons, or 45% of the total irrigation water, but only 19% of the landscape area. So that green carpet is really sucking up the water. So the total household water use for this particular property is over 100,000 gallons a year, with almost 58% going to irrigation. So a lot. So if we can cut that down, we're going to save money and save our water. So let's talk about getting rid of your lawn. And one of the methods for just getting rid of that thing is to do sheet mulching. And here I have a picture in my own home backyard where we have a lawn. We used to have a lawn, and I created a raised planting bed where I thought I would be growing some vegetables during the pandemic, considering I might need some tomatoes. And so I just tossed down a few sheets of cardboard, wet it down, composted on top of that, and just planted right in it. And so it's pretty easy to do. If you wanted to go into more detail, you can go to various websites. Here's one that's very convenient. This is Lawn to Garden, and this is the comprehensive guide to the sheet mulch process, which they go into a lot more of the nitty-gritty on how to do this, which I'm not going to go into. So this is actually really handy. It talks about the benefits of sheet mulching, which says saves time, money, and water. Builds healthy soil, creates attractive drought-tolerant gardens, eliminates the need for grass and weed-killing herbicides. So there's lots of great benefits to sheet mulching. Here's another great resource for learning more about how to sheet mulch, and this is from stopwaste.org. And so people are saying, well, can I just like scoop up the sod and take it away? It's like, that's too much work. Why not just save up those boxes that you get from Amazon deliveries or whatever, layer those on top of the grass, which smothers it. You put compost on the top, mulch on the top, the weeds, the grass are instantly gone, and then you can pull those back, punch a hole through the cardboard and plant right there, and it creates an instant garden. So it's actually a really good method, but you can read more about that particular method of getting rid of your lawn. I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty, as I mentioned. So if you're getting rid of your lawn, let's talk about lawn alternatives. Mulch is one of those things that instantly looks good and provides a nice clean slate to, if you wanted to plant there or kind of rethink the space. And it holds moisture in the soil, adds nutrients to the soil. It's just a great way to dress things up. And this is a design that I did in our neighborhood. And it instantly became dressed up when we put down some of this nice mini bark mulch on the top. So it just looks really attractive. Now, if you want grass, you just have to have a little tiny lawn somewhere. There are native alternatives that use about a third as much water as non-native turf grasses. And one place that I specify a source for lawns is the Delta Bluegrass Company. And they are actually in the Delta here in California. And they offer a few different native sod varieties. On the left here is their native mow-free, and it looks, kind of like a very nice little meadow. This is if you don't want to mow, so less work. And there's also a native bentgrass one, which is Agrostis palens, and you can mow that. It looks just like a regular lawn, but again, uses about a third as much water as a regular lawn does. So a great resource there if you're interested in native grasses. And here we have some examples of what these can look like in real world situations. This is a friend's house where she's got some nice little native grasses in a little planting area here. And sometimes you end up with like these little weird strips between a driveway and a front walkway. And this person has done some native bunch grasses as well. And then in my own yard, it's not a native plant, but I planted the non-native elfin thyme, which is a nice flat, fairly drought tolerant ground cover between some stepping stones. So it's attractive, pretty low maintenance, can be a little vigorous, but just gives you a nice kind of soft area to walk on. Now here's a specific example of a native plant that you can use if you're just interested in having a big swath of green, kind of like a lawn that you're not going to walk on, but you like that big swath of green, just like, looks like the back 40. Well, you can use ground cover native plants. And one ground cover alternative that I like to use is Cyanothis thriciflorus, Yankee Point. It's evergreen, about 15 inches tall, pretty fast growing, beautiful blue blossoms in the spring, can be in the sun or part shade, and it's very low water use. So about 1/10 as much as a regular lawn would use. And it's green all year round. It won't die back when it's in the hot part of summer. It'll look continuously green and glossy. So, you know, that look of a lush lawn without the mowing work, without, you know, spending all that money on water. So a great specific alternative here. If you want to walk in the area, one possibility that you can plant here is another great California native, and this is Achillea Millifolium. It's semi-evergreen, which means it kind of dies back a little bit to maybe about 50% cover during the wintertime, spreads by runners. You can mow it if you want to. I don't ever mow mine. And it blooms, and blooms come in different colors, white, pink, red, and it likes a combination of sun and shade. So another great alternative. Another one that I like to use, one of my favorites, and I've got this not as a ground cover, which is what's happening here, but I have it interspersed in my native lawn area, these native strawberries. And if you can plant these, they're worth it for the fruit alone. They're not as big as a big store-bought strawberry, but they're about 10 times sweeter. So we have native strawberries. How cool is that? Very tasty, nice and evergreen. And if you want more of these plants, what I generally do is I take the fruit and I just throw them around the garden wherever I want a new plant. And I usually end up with a few new sprouts. So start with one and propagate to your heart's content. Another alternative, and this is not for walking on, but again, if you want that big swath of green, this is a lighter green color. You can go with something like the Salvia Bliss, which is evergreen. It has a beautiful lilac bloom in the springtime. It's very fragrant. And these plants are quite vigorous. This is out at the Primrose Way Garden, and I'm continuously trimming these back from the pathway in here. So maybe a little bit more maintenance involved here to keep them out of the pathway. These plants would grow right out into the street if I let them. So in about 2 years, they were 8 feet across. Now they're about 12 feet across. And the space that they're growing in, the Primrose Way Garden, is only 20 feet wide. So literally 2 plants completely cover the distance between the street and the sidewalk. Another alternative, Clinopodium glassii. Again, this is another great native. You can actually make tea with the leaves. Evergreen, it likes to be in the shade. It's trailing, so it's kind of viney, but it does root where the roots go down. Just a nice alternative. So some specific examples here, you know, but let's step back and look at some of the broader concepts here. And so you're probably thinking, okay, that's a few, but how do I find more plants? And the best resource that I have found so far is at the calscape.org database, which is super easy to use, searchable database. It provides information and resources. You can find California native plants and research the plants. And from that, you can create a plant palette of trees, shrubs, perennials, bulbs, vines, and succulents. This is a great resource. This is my go-to place for information. It's done by the California Native Plant Society, who there's a local chapter here in Santa Clara Valley that's very active. They've got chapters all over. Really worth hooking up with these people to learn more and be part of a great community. But here on the website, they've got a database of 7,990 plants native to California. So lots of plants to choose from, and they've broken it down into trees, shrubs, perennials, annuals, grasses, etc. Okay, so they made it pretty easy to do searches based on the kind of plant, perhaps, that you might want. They have a planting guide, which is super handy. It talks a little bit about how to plant things, how to water things, and just how the science of it all works. And then nurseries, where do you find these great plants? And this is a great resource too, because then you can go and see the native plant nurseries, visit online to see what their inventories are. And then some places you can purchase online and go pick them up, other places deliver. And they even provide, like you can create an Excel spreadsheet so you can keep track of all your plants, which is very handy. And then butterflies. What's that about? Let's find out. So in terms of finding out, a better question then in terms of what to plant is who to feed. Remember that degree in biopsychology, and I studied ingestive behavior, which is all about eating and drinking. Okay. What we're going to discover is that plants are food. And so plants host specific butterfly and moth species. What that means is that most butterfly and moth species only feed on specific plants. They don't just eat anything. They're very picky eaters. As we know, most people know, the monarch butterfly only eats milkweed. And so if we look at California, we have 1,368 species of butterflies and moths. And so everything from monarchs to painted ladies, buckeyes, swallowtails, checker spots, hair streaks, and so forth. Beautiful fluttery things that if you plant the plants that they like to eat, you will have butterflies. And so that's the function of plants, is to provide foods for caterpillars and moths, butterflies and moths to eat. But people talk about pollinators, and when we talk about pollinators, we're mainly talking about bees. And so we know that bees move pollen around. This is what they do, they pollinate. And plant species rely on those pollinators to move that for them. Most flowering plants are not wind pollinated. The pollen doesn't get blown into the air and willy-nilly happens that it lands on the right plant. Bees are very specific. They go from the same species over and over and over again, from flower to flower to flower, moving the pollen around. And what happens then is that we see variation in each plant type. So speciation, you might end up with a plant that has maybe a bigger petal or a deeper purple. So speciation, and that occurs more rapidly when you have these bees assisting with the movement of pollen, which is the genetic material around. So that happens faster. So adding some biology into thinking about the function of plants gives you another tool in your toolbox in terms of decision making. And so what I like to do when deciding what to plant is think about who to feed. And what you can do is you can sort the plants that you like. If you're looking for trees, you can sort them or rank them depending on the number of butterfly and moth species that they feed. Some feed hundreds. whereas some feed only 2 or 3. That's important. So why not feed more with fewer plants than to feed, a couple of species? So I'll talk about that in more detail in just a little bit. But talking about biology, it's one of those powerful tools in our toolbox. And if we consider those biological factors, they may then be more important considerations than abiotic factors like climate, geology, and water for determining what to plant. Because remember, we're dealing with biological systems here, and we're thinking in terms of the ecosystem here, which, it's biology. So the biological factors, because we're affecting living organisms and we're using living organisms to retain moisture in our gardens, these are just powerful tools that we can use. So, and in San Mateo County, there's 83 species of butterflies and moths that you have in the county. And here's a beautiful butterfly on a beautiful aster in my home garden. But you're still saying, well, Juanita, I really want to reduce that water use. How can I find out how much water a single plant uses? And this handy resource, the Water Use Classification of Landscape Species, is an online searchable database for plant factors of individual plant species, and is published by the University of California Cooperative Extension and the California Department of Water Resources. And there's a handy link there that you can click on. But plants can be ranked based on the percent of water use of turf grass. So consider a non-native lawn using up, most of the water outside. And the plant factors that they're showing here are basically a percentage of that. So if you think of the lawn as 100% of water use, then something with a very low water use is 0 to 10% of that in terms of how much water it uses. So this is a great resource. If you want something that's going to use about 1/10 as much of a lawn, this is a place to see what plants those are. So very handy to make sure that you're really using those very low or low water use species. Quick thing about plant layout, you're going, oh my goodness, how do many and where do they go? So just a quick little design tip about plant layout. So whenever I tell people, if you're doing this by yourself, make it easy on yourself and use graph paper to design with. And each of those squares on a graph can equal 1 foot. And so if the square on the paper is 1/4 inch on each side, then you have 1/4 inch equals 1 foot. And if it's 1/8 of an inch, then it's 1/8 of an inch equals 1 foot. So you can draw out using on graph paper. What you should do first, consider function, remember? So add things in like pathways, because there's a function, which is getting through a garden. If you want it like a patio area, draw that first. So figure out functional areas and then figure out the planting areas. So then from your plant palette that you have, you can add in your plants at their mature diameters. So, put in the large stuff first, draw them as circles, and do the mature diameter. That will help you with spacing. Most of the circles should overlap or just touch. Plant in masses for bigger impact of what things look like. And if you plant all these as together in big masses of like low water use plants, you'll have a complete garden, and in that whole area, it'll be all low water use plants. A few design tips, plant in odd numbers for massing. This is a nice little design tip. It just looks more natural. Unless you're going for a really formal look, then you want even numbers and very symmetrical things. The order in which you plant is large trees first, then shrubs, then perennials, vines, bulbs, succulents, and annuals, okay? And even underneath things, you can plant other things. So there's always room for more. And why is that important? Because we have so much. California is a biodiversity hotspot. we have more plants in California, more plant species than any other state in the United States. We are one of about 35 or so biodiversity hotspots on the planet. So California is very special that way. Lots of our species are drought tolerant. Let's face it, California's in places is very dry. Plants have been here for millennia, so they've learned to cope in various ways with very little water. And you're probably going, well, Juanita, why do we have so many plant species? Two reasons, I think. One is because we have so many unique ecosystems in California, and plus we have so many different kinds of native bees. Across the United States, there are about 4,000 bee species. Honeybees, not native, we're not going to talk about those. But here in California, we have 1,600 species of native bees. In the Bay Area alone, we have about 400 species of native bees. And so lots of great bees and lots of unique ecosystems means lots of speciation, lots of plant types happening. And with our biodiversity hotspot here, we can keep that going. And planting native is one way to help native insect species and pollinators. If you think about other places in the world where insects are kind of struggling, we can protect what we have here by planting native. So plants are the beginning of everything. They are the primary producers of food and the basis of the food chain. They are the way that energy from the sun gets transformed by plants, and that makes that energy from the sun then accessible to things like caterpillars. And here I'm holding, I was very happy to find this. I have a Grindelia, which is a gum plant, and it had this big, fat, juicy caterpillar here, which hopefully ended up feeding some baby birds. And insects provide food for lots of other animals. Baby birds love nice, soft, squishy caterpillars because they're easy to eat. And 37% of animal species on the planet are plant-eating insects. And as I mentioned before, native insects, the insects that are here, they co-evolved with the plants. So they only eat those plants that they evolved with. Remember, insects are picky eaters. They like specific things. And so the hierarchy here, if you think, okay, but pollinators, Juanita, pollinators are spreading that genetic diversity around that makes those plants then available for butterfly and moth species to turn those things into larvae for the rest of the food chain. So, again, biologically based decision-making, function-based decision-making can really be those really great tools in our toolbox to make really good functional decisions about what to plant. As I said, plants are food. They're not really decorations, although they are decorative. They have wonderful fragrance, they have beautiful blossoms. But when you plant natives, and this is the great thing about native plants, is that your garden will attract many native pollinators and other insects, and in turn birds. Guaranteed, hands down, 100%, you will have an abundance of life when you plant native plants because it's food. You've just set out the buffet. And whenever I buy plants, I look for plants that look like this, the ones that have something eating them, because I know, oh, that's something tasty to eat. And here we have, I believe this is maybe some kind of moth species, but think about moisture in the environment, okay? Because we're trying to conserve water, and you're going, well, how does that all save water in the environment? So plants have moisture in their tissues. When the insects eat the plants, then that's where they get their moisture from. So they're nice little juicy packets of water, and they store water in their tissues. And so this is one of those biological tools that's so powerful. I mean, we can store water in rain barrels, but why don't we make water do what it's supposed to do, which is support life? And if we can have organisms storing water in their tissues, that's the best use for water. So why is it important to see native plants as food? So, you know, you're putting out the buffet, things are going to come and eat and create beautiful winged creatures, and you're going to have beautiful bumblebees coming to your garden. You don't want these insects to be attracted to your garden and then use things like leaf blowers, outdoor night lights and things like that, that will then keep them from completing their life cycles. So anything that's attracting insects and then makes it easier for other things to kill them, that's an ecological trap. So we want to avoid that as much as possible. So that's kind of like closing the loop on using native plants. Because, you know, again, we want to store water inside living tissues as well as really using less water. So really being as optimum as possible in terms of, you know, where the water goes and how much we're using. And so when we start planting more natives, what happens is that those plants, native plant gardens, then enhance connectivity and complexity in the landscape. And the more connectivity and complexity, the more those plants support each other. The roots will knit together underground and communicate with each other and support each other. And that leads to less irrigation needs. So people go, well, you know, I don't want to, you know, use so much water, so maybe I'll plant less. But less water use doesn't necessarily mean less plants, especially as you add more plants, you're building a community of plants and other organisms that will support each other and share water. Sometimes I see plants fail because it's like the one lone thing out in the middle of nothing. And so, you know, are they lonely? Do they have some support? You know, they're living organisms, and people don't like to think this way, but plants are social creatures. They just communicate in chemical ways that we don't communicate in. So if you imagine a machine where you're adding all the right parts, in this case plants, things will start to assemble themselves. Nature figures out where she wants to be. She'll find her own equilibrium. And I tell people a goal is probably about 20 native plant species local to your area to start with. And that is kind of like the backbone number, you know, that you want to get. And so, you know, we're trying to really optimize our water use and like squeeze as much use out of one drop that we can. And so here I drew this little conceptual diagram here of a tree with a deep taproot going down into the groundwater, sucking it up, and then distributing it with its lateral surface roots to other organisms that are also spreading their roots out looking for moisture. And you can create moisture traps by creating swales. You can trap moisture by using leaves and twigs, and you find that roots of plants will grow towards those piles because it's moist under there. Same with rocks. Moisture will be trapped underneath the rocks. So those are just some ways that, you know, if you're really trying to keep moisture in organisms, get it so that they can start to share moisture and then store moisture in their tissues. And so what do we mean by plant communities? You know, we have human communities, right? And it's very similar to plant communities. So the California Native Plant Society website says that a group of plant species living together are linked together by their effects on one another and their responses to the environment that they share. Typically, the plant species that co-occur in a plant community show a definite association or affinity with each other. In other words, they get along. They're not fighting for resources. They're actually a community that helps each other. You know, plants as social creatures. What kind of a weird thought is that? But it's actually true. So the takeaway insight from all of this is you're creating a community of plants that's going to create a very specific framework, and that will then be the support for other insects and animals that rely on those plants. So, you know, you have to consider all the organisms. You're not just planting, you're getting a whole community when you plant. And we have in California, as I mentioned before, so many plant communities. We've got coastal shrub, oak chaparral, deserts, redwood forest, and so forth. And here I shared a picture from a hike that I took on the very northern tip of Point Reyes. You know, we've got poppies growing and these beautiful Cirsium occidentale thistles and lupins. And these plants are so tasty for bees. They love them. And so what you see then as a reflection of the pollinators that are environment, the plants reflect the pollinators. I like to think of bees as farmers whose function in the environment is to spread that genetic diversity of plants for other insects to eat. And so we have bees living on these plants, loving the pollen, loving the nectar, and they're moving that genetic material around. So in your garden, here's the takeaway, is aim for the majority of the native plants in your garden to be local species and appropriate for your plant community. So again, we have bees moving that genetic material around. Here's a beautiful yellow-faced bumblebee, the Bombus vosnesinskii on coyote mint or Monardella villosa, another great plant. Here she's collecting pollen and nectar, and those genes are getting moved around to other plants. And that is how we get plants forming seed, because then the seed formation can occur with the fertilization. So sequence again, start with your large plants first. And, you know, now we're getting into sort of like the big overview. How do you do it? Start with your large plants first, then shrubs, then perennials. This is just easier. Start with the big stuff. Fit in as many trees as possible. Then the shrub layer should compose over 60% of all the plants. Focus on those evergreen shrubs, the ones that don't lose their leaves all at once. And then in the remaining spaces, fit in as many grasses, perennials, bulbs, succulents, ground covers, and vines as you can get. Aim for a mixture of herbaceous, ones that die completely down, and woody perennials, the ones that persist with stems and trunks and branches. And don't forget annual plants too. While you're waiting for things to grow in, you can seed in some annuals to provide a much needed pop of spring color. So start with those keystone trees. What do we mean by keystones? Well, keystone plants are those plants in the environment that form the backbone of habitat resources. Remember, this is how we leverage our biological prowess here. And the keystone shrubs, if you're thinking about a stone arch, the stone that's in the middle here holding up the arch, that's the keystone. The plants that are keystones provide the backbone of the habitat resources: food, shelter, nesting sites. Food, number of butterfly and moth species. So keystone shrubs, keystone trees, keystone plants tend to feed the most insects. That's why it's important to rank your plants. If you have a choice between one that feeds 85 versus one that feeds 5 different species, go with the one that feeds more. And so when you are supporting large numbers of organisms, you're getting moisture into more little bodies. So storing the moisture inside of organisms that are using it, that are kind of keeping the ecosystem flowing. And so the takeaway technique is to provide at least a few keystone plants that provides a resilient native plant garden. So if you imagine a keystone species that has all these different connections, okay, if you get rid of one or two, you still have a few more connections to other species. It's still resilient. It can withstand a number of stresses because it's still connected to many things. In San Mateo County, tree species, you have 22 that are native: coast live oak, black oak, creek dogwood, and so forth. We like trees, so people are going to say, well, where do I start? Start with trees. if there's anything that you take away from tonight is plant some trees. We still have some time before the really hot weather happens for the summer. We can still get those in. Trees are super important because trees help save water. Trees absorb water and release it into the air, cooling and cleaning it. I tell you, today I went outside when it was 97 degrees and I went under the oak tree in my neighbor's yard, and it was so much cooler under there. I could just feel the coolness because that tree is providing shade from the sun. It's keeping the ground cool. Trees help form half of the rain cycle, and the rain cycle is water getting evaporated up off the ocean, traveling across land until it reaches the mountain and trickling down. That's a half. The other half is trees releasing water into the atmosphere. Without trees, deserts can form. Trees provide improvements on water quality by filtering rainwater and slowing down impacts of heavy rain. They reduce flooding and stabilize soil. So trees are for bang for your buck in terms of like environmental and water saving. You know, start with trees. If you get rid of your lawn and you don't know what else to plant, plant some trees first. You know, after today's 97-degree temperatures, I'm thinking, oh, this looks so good. Clouds form more often over forested areas than non-forested areas, and the cooling effects that you get and the carbon dioxide capture, even from trees that lose their leaves during the winter, more than offset the reflection of the sun during times when those trees are bare. So trees have a net benefit, no matter what type they are. So the cooling effects cannot be understated. You know, or overstated. I just, you know, start with trees. And I went out into my yard today and I was like, what other trees can I plant? I wish I had room for a valley oak. Oaks, really no other trees come close to providing all the ecosystem services that oaks provide. The valley oak, this is at the Hopkins Avenue Pollinator Garden. This valley oak here performs the anchor function. Here, this is the main keystone plant in here, but we have other keystone species as well. Here in the Santa Clara Valley, we used to have 61% of our tree cover as valley oaks. Now it's 1%. You know, it provides critical support to all the rest of the ecosystem. It drops its leaves once a year, which, you know, it's bare. But those leaves are ecosystem gold because they support the tree's growth by shading the roots and returning nutrients to the soil. And you can plant native plants underneath of them as well. Non-native plants really don't do that well under oak trees and can be actually detrimental to them. Oaks are insect factories, transforming that sunlight into protein to feed countless birds and other species. And oak trees actually grow pretty fast and they can live up to 600 years. So, you know, your descendants will enjoy the forest that you are planting today. And they're very valuable to real estate. So yay, add value to real estate, plant some oaks. And so you're going, well, I don't have room for a big oak. What else can I plant? So I have a very tiny yard, very, very tiny. And I've crammed in a lot. And even with more plants this year than last year, I'm still using less water than I used last summer. So the things that I have planted for various and sundry reasons, because I like all of them, are, in no particular order, Acer Macrophylum, the big leaf maple. This likes to be in the shade. I've got Cercocarpus betuloides, the mountain mahogany. It does great in part shade. It's very fast growing. I even have a willow tree that I water by hand. Willows, I planted this because it is a keystone species. And, you know, I don't mind watering it by hand. I've got elderberry. I've got Prunus Elicifolia. And this, you know, if you're thinking about a small, great small tree that's evergreen and almost zero maintenance, it's the Prunus Elicifolia, the holly leaf cherry, planted in the sun. It's got these great glossy leaves, looks great. all year round, and it blooms with a white blossom, and it gives you really not very edible cherries, but I'm going to be harvesting some of those and planting more of those in my yard. I was thinking, what other can I plant? I don't really want to spend any more money, but I've got a lot of cherries. Box elder, Acer Negundo, which I hand water. The Modesto ash, which is the street tree that was already there. I've got Corylus cornuta, the hazelnut, which, you know, yay, I love hazelnuts. You need two because male and female trees need to introduce themselves for nuts. Prunus virginiana, another one. I think I've got 4 of those. I've got 2 of those. Arctostaphylos, or the big berry manzanita. I've got 3 red buds, and then Hetermeles, the toyon, another zero maintenance plant. I basically planted that in the backyard and I never have watered it. And it's about 12 feet tall now. I planted it maybe 4 years ago. Sun or part shade, super easy to grow. So these are some very specific things. If you're not knowing what to plant, this is a list of my recommendations. And then shrubs. Okay, so once we figure out the trees, we're going to look at shrubs. There are 71 shrubs native to San Mateo County. Cyanothis, great species. Hetermeles can be a shrubby plant. Wax myrtle, lupins, one of my absolute favorites, coffeeberry, and so forth. Some specific ones in my yard that I have. Vaccinium ovatum, this is our native huckleberry, and you can get very tasty berries off of that, so yum. The coffeeberry here, look at how glossy these leaves are. This is super easy to grow from seed. So if you don't want to spend much money on plants, grow things from seeds. You know, seeds are, maybe it takes a couple of years for them to catch up, but by the 3rd year, they just take off. I have Arctostaphylos ground covers. I think this one's emerald carpet. And you can see there's things that have been eating that. And then Ribes viburnifolium. This is a wonderful fragrant plant. This one is a little bit rambunctious, likes to get into everything and will just grow crazy. But these are evergreens. So we get this kind of lush, green, glossy look all year round. So it doesn't look all dry and desiccated, which things can look that way late summer. If you want that nice green lush look, aim for about 75% of your evergreen shrubs in the garden to keep it looking lush and nice looking. So all of these are pretty low water use. So once you have it planted, you're going, how do I maintain it? Well, the good news today, and there is some good news today, native gardens are less maintenance than a non-native garden with a lawn, because you're not mowing, you're not having people come out and do edging. You're not using leaf blowers. So, you know, gardening service, maybe you're not spending the money for somebody to come out once a week to mow and blow. You basically want to irrigate plants about once a week to establish them. And irrigation, remember, things will seek out moisture. So those roots are going to look for water. And so you're going to water just outside of the root ball after you plant to encourage the roots to start looking and get into the soil and start connecting with each other. Prune sparingly and only basically to control dried up or dead material of any sort for fire safety. Some plants are actually good fire breaks, like the toyon, which is not all that flammable because it stores moisture in its leaves. You don't need to fertilize, amend sparingly. Now, people with heavy clay, you may want to amend with a cactus mix to kind of loosen things up, especially if you want to enhance drainage. You want to mulch to control weeds initially, and then to establish the plants. And then what I like to do is mulch with leaves. Leaves are cheap ecosystem gold. And then if it looks messy, come back over it and mulch with a little bit of that really pretty wood chip mulch that you can put like 1 chip thick, and it looks like a thick layer, but it's actually like the cheapest, thinnest layer possible, which is what I do to make everything look uniform. You know, just leave those leaves under the plants. The leaves will break down. There's no need to use a leaf blower to blow them away, because you know what? When things are eating the leaves and they turn into pupa, they drop down into the soil underneath the plants and they hang out in leaf litter until they turn into moths and butterflies. So, you know, again, that's an ecological trap that you want to avoid, is to invite them to dinner on your plants and then get rid of where they're hanging out afterwards. So don't use leaf blowers in those planted areas. If you're using a leaf blower, use an electrically powered one on hardscape, like patios, walkways, sidewalks, driveways, and so forth. And don't use pesticide, herbicides, or fungicides. Those things get into the soil where 70% of our native bee species nest. So you don't want those things to get into the soil where they're going to interfere with development of baby bees and other things. It's actually, native gardens, it's all about not doing very much once you get it planted. Get those plants established, and then really letting nature find her equilibrium. So again, avoid creating that ecological trap. Remember, these plants are like super attractive to all kinds of insect species, butterflies, moths, bees. It's crazy, the life that these gardens support. And you want to, you know, help them complete their life cycles. So you don't want something that will trap them and help them die sooner before they can complete their life cycle. So a few more easy things to do. You know, people have windows without curtains. You know, drop over some blackout fabric on your windows at night to create less light pollution at night, which is actually a huge help to do things. Many insects are attracted to lights at night. Some people say, well, I need security lights. Motion sensors are great. If you absolutely have to have lights on all the time at night, which there really is no reason to, use a yellow light bulb. Insects are less attracted to yellow lights. Leave the leaves, so again, less work, and eliminate the use of pesticides, herbicides, and fungicides, and then reduce gasoline exhaust as much as possible by using electrical devices. Pollinators are using fragrance to help orient themselves, and the smell of these things interfere with that behavior. So, you know, planting natives, selecting those native plants and putting them in the ground, there's another step to kind of complete the circle, because remember, we're not just selecting those native plants and creating it, we're creating actually an ecosystem and optimizing water use and doing all of these wonderful things. And when you do these wonderful things, amongst the other ecosystem services and saving money on water and maintenance, the more that you understand about these interrelationships, you learn how to optimize the productivity of your native plant garden, leading to an abundance of life, as well as the enhancement of your appreciation and your role in caring for nature's complex beauty. Remember, we can control where moisture goes in the environment. We can limit the amount of moisture that we use, and we can store moisture inside of living organisms where it does the most good. And with that, I would be happy to take anybody's questions.
Great, thank you so much, Juanita. We actually have some questions in the Q&A, so I can go ahead and read a question from Tara. She said first, thanks for the lecture. I have a vegetable garden. What is a good native cover crop? I have some native San Francisco strawberries and Sierra Mountain strawberries, but neither are technically from my area. Are they good cover crops with vegetables?
Native strawberries as cover crops?
Native, yeah.
So cover crops generally refer to things that enhance soil fertility. Native plants that do that are the ones that fix nitrogen in the soil. Any sort of leguminous plants like lupins, for example. Lupins will take nitrogen from the air and store it in the soil. Cnothis does the same thing. And so those are things that will actually help with soil fertility. And so those are the things that we think of as cover crops, things that actually enhance the soil fertility. And then when things like the lupins, most lupins don't live very long. Once they die, I don't pull them out of the ground. I just snip them off at the base. That way, the nodes on the roots where they've incorporated nitrogen remain in the soil and then become available for other plants.
We have another question. What are the best places in the Bay Area to buy native plants? Places
Ooh,
that don't use pesticides like
yes,
neonicotinoids.
yes. So native plant nurseries are pretty adamant about not using those things. I have my favorite ones that I like to go to. There's Yerba Buena Nursery over in Half Moon Bay. They have excellent plants. I go to the Grassroots Ecology Nursery in the Foothill Park Preserve here in Palo Alto, and you can look at their inventory online, purchase those plants online and go and pick them up. So that makes a nice little trip up to the Foothill Park Preserve to pick those up. East Bay Wilds over in Oakland is another good one. Linda Vista Natives down in San Jose, Bay Natives up in San Francisco. And the California Native Plant Society also sells plants. They have a native plant sale. And as far as I know, none of these places use any sort of pesticides or fungicides or anything like that.
Great. The next question is from Gary. How do I know how much water or too little water when planting California poppies from seeds when the plants are small?
Poppies. So basically, you want to keep them moist while they're still seedlings. Depending on the kind of poppy that you plant, like the maritime poppy, the yellow one, actually has a taproot. And so you want to encourage that one to send that taproot down to find deep soil moisture. And so instead of sprinkling them and just keeping the top layer of soil moist, you want to give it a good drenching, and then use a moisture meter, a probe that you stick down into the soil, and see if, 10 or 12 inches down, however long that the probe is, whether it's telling you that is moist. And if it's moist deep down, that's good, because that's where that taproot's going to go.
How do you know which plants are resistant to voles?
So, if I have a plant that is I know is going to be tasty, which are going to be plants that have probably a nice fleshy root or some kind of tuberous root system or bulb-like root system, what I'll do is I will line the planting hole with a fine mesh of chicken wire and plant it in there so that they can't get through there. That's really the only way to prevent them from getting to plants that are in the soil. Another way to do vole control is to put up a raptor perch in your yard or an owl box to have them, once again, leveraging biological entities to help us and to help, close the food chain on those voles.
Great, thanks.
Okay, another question came in. Some tree services offer free wood chips. Can you use these as mulch? How high is the risk of carrying plant diseases or pests? We have a couple of huge live oaks that I don't want to endanger.
Right. So, it might be best. I mean, sometimes in my public gardens, we started off using the mulch chips that the city provided, which was great. I prefer to get my mulches. I mean, free mulch is great. Quality control. It's a conundrum. If you can get, you know, there's, if you're really needing mulch chips, you know, get them from your city. I wouldn't get them from random gardening services. You know, I would try to get it from a city source, and a lot of municipalities do provide, especially at their public community gardens, big piles of chips, because one of the things that they do is they get rid of you know, dead trees and then grind them up, and they need places to put all these wood chips. At least they do provide a lot of that in Palo Alto, which is very nice. But you know, under a live oak, I would just basically leave any leaves that have fallen under there, and then go in with a very thin layer of some nice decorative mini bark mulch. It's a little bit more expensive, but it lasts a long time and it looks really good. And that way you're kind of creating like a leaf lasagna with a layer of leaves that doesn't get really crushed down, especially if you only put like a very thin layer of bark chips on the top.
Thank you. An attendee asks, I have a couple of Clinopodium Douglasii, excuse my pronunciation, which I Googled and it looks like it's Yerba Buena,
Yes.
that are being eaten down so badly that I don't think they're going to survive. I'm pretty sure it's an insect eating them, not an animal. I tried diatomaceous earth with no luck. Any ideas on how to protect them, or should I just give up?
So that plant, you know, whenever I have plants that are getting eaten down to a nubbin, you know, I take it as a compliment, but it also means that I need to plant more of that plant, because there's hungry denizens who need food, and they're, you know, I would get more of it and just keep planting it, and then what happens as you're adding more native plants is that you're going to be introducing some predators that will help you out with keeping those hungry insects in check. It may also be that you have snails or slugs, and you know, and those are the bane of my existence, snails and slugs. And so some people put out beer traps to get those. I would try something like that to see if you have snails coming in and doing things, and especially if you can see any sort of slime trails. But if you don't have slugs or snails, and most people do have slugs and snails, then, you know, if your plants are getting eaten down to a nubbins, that means hungry insects. And plant more, because we really like this and we want more. So that's usually how I handle those things.
Great. That was actually our last question from the audience. I was trying to think of my own questions to ask you. You had some great slides with examples of particular plant selections that you recommended. Could you expand on plant selections for shrubs?
Oh, I thought you would never ask, Andrea. So if I have a choice to plant a shrub, it's going to be some kind of Arctostaphylos, the manzanita. And it is a keystone plant, and it's also evergreen. And it's an early bloomer. They bloom like January, February. Some of them bloom in December. You know, there's a range, so you can get a bunch of different kinds. And some have small, dark, glossy green leaves. Some have bigger leaves and beautiful red, smooth bark. So that Arctostaphylos is my go-to shrub, because they're just, you know, they're so easy and so low water use, and you can almost not kill them, except if you water them too much during hot weather. And that's something I wanted to mention in terms of irrigation. It becomes challenging to plant things during hot weather, because when you water during hot weather, the soil becomes warm and moist, which encourages pathogens in the soil, which, you know, can kill a plant before it can establish. And so the best thing to do is to, when you're establishing a native plant and you're trying to establish it during the heat of summer, is to water during the absolute coolest hours of the day. Usually, way before 10 o'clock in the morning, to get it established. So Arctostaphylos, hands down. And another reason why I like it is because there's no pruning that's involved. There's no blossoms to deadhead. It's really like the most easy shrub in the world to plant. And they last a long time. I think an Arctostaphylos can live up to and beyond 25 years. So that's a great one to start with. Another one that's maybe a little bit more tricky is the Cyanothis. And Cyanothis, the blue blossom plant, the ground covers are great, but this is a plant that wants to be in the sun. It just doesn't like much shade. You'll end up with the plants kind of showing you how they like to grow. So like, for example, we have the Cyanothis Valley Violet at the Arcadia Place Garden, the Island Drive Garden, and also the Gwynedd Street Garden. At the Island Drive Garden, where they are in the shade, they're more like a ground cover. In the Arcadia Place Garden, they're rounded shrubs. They're actually mounding up. And that's how they're supposed to grow. And so far they're doing great. They're not super vigorous, but that's another shrub that I really like, the Cyanothis. And they tend not to be as long-lived as a manzanita. Those are some of the ones that I really like. Because again, Cyanothis, you don't have to deadhead the flowers. You just leave the seed heads, but I find them to be a little tricky sometimes to place, but that's the one I would go with. Another one that I would have, that I would plant hands down, is the Toyon, the Heteromelies arbutifolia, because that is such a low water use plant and it's such a great fire break. So if you live in kind of a wildland area, those are actually pretty helpful in terms of being a fire break. Not that they're completely fireproof, but they can slow down the spread of a fire. And they have a great white blossom and red berries that birds like. So it's just another great plant. There are just so many great plants that I like, but those are kind of like my go-tos. It's like, I'm always looking for places to plant more manzanitas when I have the opportunity.
Great, thank you. And a couple more questions have come in and we're getting lots of praise. Thanking you for your information and pictures. Gary asks, for steep west-facing hillsides with a lack of topsoil, is it better to use shredded redwood or shredded cedar for native plants?
I think the one that's going to not migrate down the slope, the one that's a little bit heavier perhaps, and I don't know which one that would be. I would, whichever one you like better than the one that you can afford, that's the one I would use.
Great. And then another question came in. I'd really like to plant an Umbellifloria, but our yard is small and they can be enormous. Would it be realistic to try to keep it to 15 feet by pruning, and how fast would it grow?
An Umbellifloria, that would be the bay tree, I think they're talking about. I would not plant one in a small yard. And that's the landscape architect in me talking. They're just not big trees in small spaces is not a good idea. Because plants can be thugs in terms of demanding space. And so I would look at something, as much as you would love this tree, I think it would be very difficult to keep it to, residential yard size. There's just a few other good alternatives that, are lovely, and that are more appropriate to the space. I have people who plant, and I just hate this, redwood trees in their backyards. And that's always a mistake in a residential situation when you don't have space, because redwood trees tend to be monsters, and they live a long time and are expensive to remove when they get too big. So, you know, the ones that can get too big will get too big. So you really want to think about those spaces and whether you want to have the expense of removing a too big tree in 20 years, and it's expensive to remove big trees. It's like $10,000+ to remove something that maybe cost 30 and was so cute, but they do grow. And so, I would try to find something that looked very similar, perhaps, and try to enjoy the bigger trees, maybe in the parks. And if you have a friend who has a big yard, that would be more appropriate. Maybe offer to plant one for them so that they can have it and you don't have the headache. Or you could, um, try it and see what happens, with those caveats in mind.
Great, thank you. Do you have any advice for dealing with an overpopulation of ants?
Ugh.
And she wants to avoid using any kind of poison, but some kind of organic alternative.
Yes, so it's interesting that you mention ants, because as much as I love insects, I do not like these things crawling on me. And we have a hot tub in our backyard, and they like to get inside underneath the hot tub cover. And it's just like, how do I get rid of them? So what I have been using are the Taro liquid ant baits, which is basically sugar water and borax. And those things work great. I take a few of them, put them around the hot tub, and the ants will actually go inside the traps. They'll fill up with ants, and then I'll put new ones out. So that has actually worked really well for me. And that's, only ants seem to be going in there. So I think that those are good. And it is, the sugar water and the borax are both natural things. And it's not like spread everywhere. It's actually inside a little plastic trap, so that, it's very localized, and they go to that. So you don't have to worry about, poisoning the soil like that.
Great. Next question. Thank you so much. We have some beautiful oak trees. What types of native plants should we think about planting near them to keep them healthy?
So, oaks like heteromeles, they tend to, communicate. The roots will meet up and have conversations. And you want to plant something like that outside of the drip line of the tree. Now, if you wanted to plant something underneath of the tree, you could plant something like coyote mint, which would be just fine under there. If you visit the Gwenda Street Garden, you'll see that what we have planted under there is Stachys albans, the native lamb's ear. It's kind of an herbaceous plant, but it's pretty vigorous, and the big oak that's there doesn't seem to mind them being there, and they're just very soft and lovely. So those are a couple of ones that will do well. And I do believe on the Calscape site, they have information about other things that you can plant under oaks as well.
Great, Juanita. That was our last question, and we're at 8:25, which is almost time. So I think maybe it's time to close our presentation. And I just want to thank you so much. You got a lot of comments through the chat and through the Q&A. Thank you for a very informative presentation. So thank you. And thank you to everyone who attended this evening to learn about selecting native plants for your garden.
Thank you, Juanita. And just a reminder to everyone that we'll get a link out to attendees with the link to the recording and to the presentation as well. So we'll need maybe a day or so to get that to you.
Great. All right. Thank you and good night.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.